Hey there, it's Orphe Diwangi, the co-host of the Everyday Economics podcast. Exciting news! Check out my new weekly column at thecentersquare.com. Join me as I break down complex economic trends in a way that's easy to understand for everyone. Check out the column every week and stay informed about the economic forces shaping our world. Be sure to subscribe to the Everyday Economics podcast and visit thecentersquare.com today.
Welcome to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Coming up, we'll review the week's top stories about the state's continued population decline, according to the recent IRS data, and the impact of a recent U.S. Supreme Court decision declining to take challenges of Illinois' gun and magazine ban. I'll then join the Center Square's Dan McCaleb to further discuss those stories and more. That's ahead with Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop.
Do you care about school spending, classroom curriculums, and transparency policies in education, but find it hard to cut through the partisan noise? The nonprofit Franklin News Foundation is bringing you straight news reporting on education through Chalkboard News. We're talking news without spin. Franklin brings fact-based news that makes sense to everyday parents, teachers, and readers who have skin in the game. By donating to Franklin, you can help American families and communities receive the education-focused news they deserve. Become a supporter today at franklinnews.org/donate.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Here are some of the top stories from the past week. More than 87,000 people moved out of Illinois, taking with them nearly $10 billion in income, according to the latest Internal Revenue Service data. For well over a year, Governor J.B. Pritzker's denied the state's population decline, saying the census is getting it wrong. In May, he doubled down.
You should take what I'm saying as truth, that actually when we count people, it turns out we're gaining.
However, IRS data shows between calendar years 2021 and 2022, the number of people flowing into Illinois was nearly 177,000, and the number flowing out was over 264,000, a net loss of 87,286. Republican State Senator Andrew Chesney said, by Democrats continuing to deny population decline, they continue bad policies.
We're not bringing in the best and the brightest in many cases to the state of Illinois. We're actually pushing them out of our state through awful policies, and we're backfilling it with folks that want services.
Total lost income was $9.8 billion. Florida was the biggest gainer of Illinoisans, leaving the state with $31,600, taking with them $4.1 billion in income. Now that the U.S. Supreme Court has said it won't take cases challenging Illinois' gun ban without final judgment from the appeals court, it's back to the lower courts. Several cases went through the district and appeals court on initial proceedings, but no final judgment's been issued. Tuesday, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas denied granting plaintiffs' requests to the U.S. Supreme Court to take the cases without final judgment. Gun control groups heralded the decision to not take the cases. State Representative Bob Morgan said the ruling, quote, keeps weapons of war off the streets. Hannah Hill with the National Foundation for Gun Rights said while Illinois' gun ban remains in place, Thomas's opinion shows the law's days are numbered with his criticism of the appeals court ruling from last year.
He used the term nonsensical, contrived, highly suspect. And he said outright, it is difficult to see how the Seventh Circuit could have concluded that the most widely owned semi-automatic rifles are not arms protected by the Second Amendment.
A bench trial is set in the Southern District of Illinois Federal Court in East St. Louis, September 16th. Hill said there are other cases across the country also in the pipeline. Those are the top stories from the past week from Illinois. Find more online at thecentersquare.com. Coming up for Illinois in Focus, I'll join the Center Square's Dan McCaleb to further discuss the news. This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop.
Tired of being in the dark about what happens day to day under the dome in Springfield? Do you want to be more informed in the decision-making process? If so, you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch elected officials in action, holding them accountable, and having your say on issues that matter most to you. Blue Room Stream is the perfect way to stay informed about Illinois state government and to be a more engaged citizen. Become a subscriber today at blueroomstream.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas this week declined to take on current challenges to Illinois' ban on more than 170 semi-automatic guns and rifles, saying the cases aren't yet ready for Supreme Court review. But Thomas criticized the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals after it reversed a lower court's ruling granting challengers of the ban a preliminary injunction stopping enforcement. Joining me to discuss this complicated series of cases is Illinois Associate Editor Greg Bishop. Greg, you've been covering the gun ban and the challenges to it since day one. Bring us up to speed on what's going on here.
So to start with, the Illinois gun ban and magazine ban remains in place. That's ultimately the initial takeaway from Justice Thomas's order that he issued on the 1st of July. And this was an order answering the request from plaintiffs asking the U.S. Supreme Court to take these cases challenging Illinois' gun ban. So the gun ban remains in place. And Thomas said, listen, the case is not ready yet. There has not been a final judgment in the district courts or the appeals court. So once that final judgment's made in the challenge, Justice Thomas said the U.S. Supreme Court will be able to take that case. And in his opinion, denying taking the case on what's called an interlocutory appeal, that's essentially saying that you're appealing the case in the middle of the case because there's been no final judgment in the Southern District. So in the Southern District, you actually do have a bench trial that was scheduled for September 16th, and that would be on final judgment. So when this measure and when this challenge actually gets to the U.S. Supreme Court, it will only be after the Southern District makes a ruling on a final judgment. That final judgment goes to the appeals courts where they would make a ruling one way or the other, and then either side of this case can take it to the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's essentially what Justice Thomas said in his opinion. Gun control advocates, they heralded the decision saying that this keeps the state's gun ban in place. State Representative Bob Morgan said this keeps weapons of war off the streets. You had other gun control advocates saying that this is good news for the state of Illinois. And the gun rights advocates seem to indicate that those looking at the ruling didn't necessarily read all of the ruling because Justice Thomas, he criticized the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals out of Chicago for their ruling. When I talked with Hannah Hill, she distilled it down. She's from the National Foundation for Gun Rights. She said that Thomas used words like nonsensical, contrived. Thomas even said that Illinois' gun ban is highly suspect. The one thing Thomas spelled out in his order is that the U.S. Supreme Court has clearly not done enough to spell out the previous precedents on Second Amendment jurisprudence, meaning when they've made rulings in the past, the New York State Rifle Association v. Bruin ruling, and before that, the Heller D.C. case, and even before that, other cases where they've essentially said you have to equate your law, if you want it to be constitutional, it has to match with text, history, and tradition. Meaning, does it conform with the text of the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms? Does it resemble laws that may have been in place around the time of our founding in the United States? Those are some of the things that the Supreme Court's laid out. But Thomas said apparently they've not been more clear, and now they're going to have to at some point make a decision on what types of firearms can or cannot be regulated. And Thomas even went as far as to say that the AR-15 is a commonly owned firearm, a semi-automatic firearm like what's been banned in Illinois, along with 169 other semi-automatic firearms that have been banned in Illinois. Thomas even looking at some of the liberal justices' recent dissent in some cases, saying that semi-automatic firearms are common. So the gun rights advocates upset that the gun ban remains in place and the Supreme Court didn't take this on an interlocutory appeal, but they see the writing on the walls from Thomas's decision that the state's gun ban is the days are numbered. As you've got the case in the Southern District going to final judgment, the question is how quickly it's going to get back up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and also, Are there other lawsuits from across the country dealing with similar questions in other states that may actually get to the U.S. Supreme Court before Illinois' cases? So there's a lot going on, but the next big step here in Illinois is September 16th with the Southern District of Illinois Federal Court set to take this case up for a bench trial to get to that final judgment that Justice Thomas has said that the U.S. Supreme Court needs.
Yeah, so my reading of the coverage of Justice Thomas's denial of the Supreme Court taking the case now, just because it's not ready, it hasn't been adjudicated at the district court level or the appellate level. He's one of just 9 Supreme Court justices, let's be clear. So he's got one of 9 votes on there, but that it looks like he certainly thinks Illinois' gun ban is unconstitutional. It is a conservative court. There are 6, maybe 5, depending on how you figure Chief Justice Roberts in this whole thing, conservatives on the court. So I can understand gun rights advocates in Illinois being not happy that they're not taking it up immediately, but celebrating the wording in Justice Thomas's denial.
Well, and even with the denial, it did note that Justice Alito would have granted cert, meaning Justice Alito, he would have given the plaintiffs what they wanted for the U.S. Supreme Court to take the case on an interlocutory appeal. So there you've got another indication of maybe how some people are viewing this issue and when is the right time to deal with this question. Because one thing gun rights advocates say is the Second Amendment for years has been relegated to a second-class right, meaning they feel that they're being pushed to the side and allowed for their rights to be delayed over controversial issues like the right to keep and bear arms. So it's not the last we've heard of this out of Illinois. Again, September 16th in the Southern District. We'll be there covering that, and you'll be able to stay up to date at thecentersquare.com.
Moving on, despite Governor J.B. Pritzker's repeated claims that Illinois' population is not declining, more government data this week that says the exact opposite of that. This coming from the IRS, who put out new information based on migration patterns and moving income and tax dollars. Tell us about this story that we reported at Center Square.
Yeah, so the IRS shows that in the latest year of data that they've analyzed, from 2021 to 2022, Illinois lost $10 billion in income because 87,000 people moved out of the state. So the numbers, when you look at them, it shows how many people have migrated into Illinois, but it also shows how many people have migrated out from Illinois. And when you add those two numbers together, you get a deficit of 87,000 plus people moving out of the state in that year from 2021 to 2022. That's $10 billion fewer in adjusted gross income that is no longer in the state of Illinois. This is just one set of data, Dan. We, of course, have been talking about the U.S. Census Bureau and the data that they provide. And they, of course, have shown a decade of decline, annual estimates of the state losing tens of thousands of people, if not more. And then we lost a congressional seat in the last 10-year decennial census. That was on top of, seats of Congress we've lost in the previous census. But Governor Pritzker has, despite the numbers, not just from the census, not just from the IRS, even from moving van companies, showing Illinois amongst the most amongst the states that have the most people moving out, Governor Pritzker and leading Democrats have denied the state is losing population. We have yet to get a chance to get in front of the governor to ask him about this latest report that indicates, again, a continued decline in population, but also it shows the receipts. Right? We can see that the IRS reporting indicates that a lot of people moved out of Illinois to Florida, taking with them more than $4 billion. While all of these other people moving in, it's not enough to offset those moving out. And also the income levels are interesting. It seems that we're seeing a larger number of income for people who are leaving the states versus those who are actually coming into the state. But it's not just 1 year off here, Dan. I looked back at the previous years in IRS data, and it showed, at least the past 6 years, tens of thousands of people moving out each year. and total $47.5 billion in lost income just in the past 6 years of people moving out of the state. So whether or not we'll get that chance to get the governor to look at this, not sure, but Republicans who are in the super minority in the state say that there needs to be change. There needs to be tax policy changes to grow the economy. There needs to be a focus on how to get control of the state's property taxes, making the states more business friendly, lowering regulations, and also addressing crime. And that's something else that people are saying is maybe fueling some of the exodus out of Illinois. But the latest data, it's hard to ignore. 87,000 fewer people in 1 year, stacked on top of years before that, where you had lost population. And when you see the total number of dollars leaving the state, $47.5 billion in 6 years, that's a large number.
Greg, I do have confidence that someone from our Illinois team, will be able to get that question to ask of Governor Pritzker. He happens to be in Washington, D.C. Today, and I should also note that we're recording this on Wednesday, July 3rd, because of the Independence Day holiday. But he happens to be in Washington, D.C. with other Democratic governors meeting with President Biden after the debate debacle from last week. Anyway, I'm confident the next media availability he'll have where we're in front of him, we'll ask that question. But moving on, Greg, it is July 3rd, as I noted. That means on July 1st, just a couple of days ago, a number of tax increases went into effect for Illinoisans across the state, including an increase in the state's gas tax. Just summarize, if you would, for us all the tax increases that took effect.
Yeah, so one main reason why July 1st is the day that we see these types of things kick in is because that's when the state's new fiscal year began. So in spring session, there was all this talk about the budget, especially crammed into the last week. Surely we remember those long nights here at the Center Square. But the budget, it was passed in late May, and it's supposed to begin July 1st. Part of that includes to spend $53.1 billion. There's about $1 billion of tax increases. That's because we have the largest state budget now, again, at $53.1 billion. The tax increases range from the cap on retailers and the discount they get to a cap on loss for businesses that they can deduct in their taxes. But there's also hundreds of millions of dollars in increased taxes on sports betting companies, as well as an increased tax on video gaming terminals. So these are all combined for July 1st. It's kicking in, and you've got a lot of tax dollars being generated off of this. But with the gas tax, what's interesting is that wasn't necessarily part of this budget. You actually have to go back to 2019 from when Illinois doubled the gas tax with a bipartisan measure. Some Republicans did support that in both chambers of the legislature, and the governor signed it. It was a multi-year plan. Increased the gas tax, doubling it to pay for infrastructure projects. It also increased various gambling taxes back then as well. All of that going into road funds and other types of construction projects across the state. But that doubling of the gas tax didn't stop there. It included, as part of that 2019 law, an annual increase in gas tax pegged to inflation every July 1st at the start of a fiscal year. So here we are. We've got July 1st, another increase in the gas tax, and Illinois policy actually went back and looked at the previous years since 2019, and they estimate that an average of $184 more is what those filling up the pump here in Illinois are having to pay since 2019 per year. So tack that on top of other inflation, right? Just the cost of energy in general. Clearly, there's another day where we can mark it on the calendar as to whether we're going to see tax increases. July 1st is that day.
And of course, it being July 4th holiday weekend, a lot of people are traveling, so they're going to see their costs go up, getting from one place to another. And it's the rest of the summer, if you're traveling, you're going to be paying more in gas taxes to the state of Illinois.
Well, and also part of the budget July 1st Some may think that the grocery tax is going by the wayside. And the governor's talked about that in speeches, how we lowered the grocery tax, we eliminated the grocery tax statewide. That actually doesn't kick in for quite some time. So while there may be some politics involved there heading into a November election, it's clear that that measure, lowering the state's grocery tax, I believe it doesn't happen until 2025. So how that's going to impact people when they're going out, looking at the increased gas tax, and possibly being impacted as a retailer and so on. Again, these things happen before they enact a budget, and July 1st being that day where the taxes are going to be going up.
All right. Greg, another piece of legislation that Governor Pritzker signed, pretty controversial. House Bill 4417 will allow public high schools, including charter schools, to designate and annually observe a week known as Workplace Readiness Week. It sounds fine, getting high school students ready for the workplace post-graduation, whether some will be going on to college, some will be entering the workforce. But opponents say it will provide a platform for union propaganda. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, so Workplace Readiness Week is not mandatory, but if a school district does observe Workplace Readiness Week, then the measure the governor signed this week would require they have to follow a certain curriculum. State Senator Mike Halpin, who had this in the Senate, he said that they'll be required to initiate a certain curriculum which discusses state, federal, and local labor laws and some labor history. The curriculum will also discuss apprenticeship opportunities within the labor workforce, Halpin said of the bill. But several Republicans in the Senate pushed back. State Senator Dan McConkey said, obviously it's not mandated that schools adopt this, but if they do observe Workplace Readiness Week as an official week for them to observe, then this law limits the free speech of those teachers who may be wanting to teach about workplace readiness. So he opposed the bill. You had State Senator Craig Wilcox also stand up and oppose the bill, saying that he's worried that this could lead to some type of indoctrination of students to favor one side or the other in business and labor conflicts. So while it might seem a little how can you say minute of an issue? And even, the Republicans who oppose this said everybody wants to make sure that students are ready for the workplace. There's still some concern that there could be some politicization of the education curriculum if indeed schools were to take up and recognize Workplace Readiness Week.
Greg, I had not heard of such a thing before, but I did find that California enacted a very similar law to what Illinois just passed in its legislative session and was signed by Governor Pritzker. It seems like California's was a lot more transparent, though, because it out and out says they talk about labor rights and union rights in the classroom in California. So this seems like it might be something that's working its way through blue states and their legislatures. I don't know. We'll see. Greg, we are almost out of time, but wanted to touch on one more story, and that has to do with Chicago. A new study of the 148 largest cities in the U.S. ranks Chicago as one of the worst run in the country. Can you just briefly explain why?
Yeah, so across a variety of different metrics, looking at financial stability, education, health, safety, economy, and even leadership, overall the city ranked 131 out of 148. So among the worst run countries in the country, worst run states in the country, and that's according to Wallet Hub, looking at all of these different factors from large cities across the country.
Obviously not good for taxpayers in the city of Chicago, who fund government. But that is all the time we have. Greg, thank you for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story and all of the stories we discussed at thecentersquare.com.
Hey there, it's Orphe Diwangi, the co-host of the Everyday Economics Podcast. Exciting news! Check out my new weekly column at thecentersquare.com. Join me as I break down complex economic trends in a way that's easy to understand for everyone. Check out the column every week and stay informed about the economic forces shaping our world. Be sure to subscribe to the Everyday Economics Podcast and visit thecentersquare.com today.